think that now we're just moving to the next level, and that it's not a rebuild, it's not a reload, it's just taking this to the next level and getting to that Super Bowl.
Things have not been going to plan, to say the least, for the Las Vegas Raiders. Mark Davis saying that it was not a rebuild and the Super Bowl was in sights for the Raiders prior to this season. And the Raiders do have the roster to do it. They just haven't finished games. They've been in close games every single week. They actually have a negative 5-point differential between them and their opponent. And if you're going to say the Chiefs are the potential AFC champions, then you'd have to say last week the Raiders are one play away from beating the AFC champions, and arguably could have had it not been for a key mistake or a key bad call in a certain situation. But the Raiders sit here at 1-4, one of 4 teams in the NFL that are 1-4 right now. This is not the company you want to be in. The Lions, the Panthers, the Pittsburgh Steelers right here. But there is still some bright spots based on last year, and the Raiders making the playoffs last year, 10-7 record. That's all you really need in order to make the playoffs in the NFL these days. You know, you have an extra playoff spot. This happened just within the past few years, kind of a new expanded playoffs. And you even had in the NFC last year, 9-8 team, like the Eagles, make the playoffs. So the Raiders, even though they have 4 losses, you really still have the luxury, the privilege, and the opportunity to still withstand 4 additional losses, maybe 3, and still make the playoffs. This is totally possible. And especially when you're a team like the Raiders who've been in every game. And when you look at ESPN's Football Power Index, now what is this? This just takes into account what you've done in particular games, who you've played against, who they've beaten and whatnot, to determine where you actually ranked in the NFL and how likely are you to win your next game. The Raiders are still sitting here at number 8, right behind the Bengals, right above the Chargers as the 8th highest ranked in the Power Index because of the strength of their schedule. The Raiders have had the 8th strongest schedule so far in the NFL. 8th overall, tough competition, especially last week against the Chiefs. You've had obviously the Cardinals, the Titans. Even though they did not start out hot, they were still the number 1 seed in the playoffs last year. So that's some tough competition. And obviously the Chargers, when they were fully healthy, the Raiders played the Chargers at their best, at their healthiest this year. And when you look at the remaining strength of schedule for the Raiders, it is actually surprisingly 26th in the NFL. 26th in the NFL, meaning it's incredibly easy compared to what they've done so far. It is literally over 3 times easier than who they've played thus far. So the Raiders do sit here at 1-4, and it does not look bright. The future does look dim, but they have an opportunity here to really at least get 9 wins on the season, maybe 8 wins on the season, and still make the playoffs. And over 60% of my viewers are not subscribed. Make sure you subscribe to this channel for more Raiders content. They don't have as many crazy injuries as some of these other teams. I mean, look at the Broncos. Their quarterback is injured, an injury that he's never had before, that he had to get, minor surgery to repair. The Chargers, their quarterback's banged up as well. Joey Bosa is still on IR. And the Raiders don't have substantial problems like this. Yes, we know Nate Hobbs recently fractured or maybe broke some bones in his hand. Who knows if he's going to be 100% even if he does play, but still nothing too substantial, right? It's nothing as crazy as Bosa going on IR. I mean, that's the equivalent of that for the Raiders would be if Crosby had to go on IR. So still nothing that insane. Now, when you're looking at the Raiders' rest of their schedule, bye week this week, and then you go off and play the Texans that, are doing as poorly as the Raiders, and then you have the Saints. And this is where the Raiders enter sudden death mode, because I feel like within these next 4 games, the Texans, the Saints, the Jaguars, the Colts, I feel like the Raiders cannot afford to lose one of those games. I think these games are ones that you were supposed to win. I just feel like this would be so demoralizing to lose any of these next 4 games. It'd be way too demoralizing. So I think the Raiders cannot on a psychological level. However, these are the ones that are supposed to be your easy victories to help you get pushed into the playoffs. And if the Raiders win these next 4 games, I mean, they sit here at 5-4 with a winning record going into November 20th in week 11 into the season against the Broncos, against Seattle, against Chargers. Now, I think these games towards the end are definitely going to be more difficult, and you'd project them to be more difficult. Chargers, Rams, the New England Patriots, Bill Belichick, he knows Josh McDaniels, the Niners and the Kansas City Chiefs, which arguably are going to be the hardest games. So So just doing a quick schedule prediction, I say we win these next 4 games. Maybe you take a L against the Rams. You also beat Seattle and the Chargers. I don't think the Chargers are going to sweep us this year. And then say you take a L against New England. So the Rams in New England, and then an L against either the Niners or the Chiefs. You could still walk out of here with a 10-7 record. And say you lose to both the Chiefs and the Niners, then you have a 9-8 record. So things are still totally possible based on who they're going to play, based on who they have played. But let's say things go dark and things can go in that direction. I do not know the contract details of Josh McDaniels, but I do believe all things are on the table. We know what happened the moment the Raiders lost to the Titans. Mark Davis had his meeting with Josh McDaniels, and as you saw on the clip at the beginning of this video, the aspirations were Super Bowl. We're not rebuilding. We are not retooling. So I still think something like a coaching change could be on the table if the Raiders lose a significant amount of games, if the Raiders get embarrassed, if the Raiders end up with only 6 wins on the season, 5 wins on the season. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't want to have to reestablish a whole entire new regime. But if Mark Davis deep down truly believes that Josh McDaniels cannot get it done, if he truly is disappointed in Josh McDaniels and he was truly convinced by Josh McDaniels that we had Super Bowl aspirations this year, which that clip at the beginning of the show would allude you to think so, then I think that is on the table. However, maybe he was just saying that at the beginning of the season to try to hype up the fans, get fans excited about the Josh McDaniels hire, and maybe the Super Bowl or deep playoff run was never on the table, and maybe deep down Mark Davis knows that this is sort of a retooling, rebuilding year looking on to next year. Now that would be more realistic. I mean, it's not very often that you have a first-year head coach, his first time with a team, go to the Super Bowl, even win a Super Bowl. It's incredibly rare. I mean, I think that one of the last times you had that was John Gruden when he went to the Buccaneers after being traded from the Raiders. It's a rare occurrence to happen. Now let's just say the Raiders totally collapse. They don't run the table. They don't win 4 games in a row here. They drop to the Colts, who, hey, they beat the Chiefs earlier this year. They dropped to the Jags, who totally blew out the Chargers this year and aren't no joke. Zay Jones is making some plays over there. And if all this happens and you lose to these teams who you're already underdogs against, teams like the Rams, the Niners, and the Chiefs, let's just say all this happens, it's a total disaster. Well, the Raiders still need to pay attention to who's making plays this year because we have so many people whose contract expires after this season, and the Raiders are going to have to make a decision. Are they going to re-sign these people? Are they going to let them test free agency? And that's what you're doing right now with Josh Jacobs, right now with Jonathan Abram, right now with Cleveland Farrell. These 3 people are probably the most highest priority to figure out what are your future plans with them. And Denzel Perryman as well, Pro Bowl linebacker last year, wanted a contract extension prior to the beginning of the season. I think injury problems and then the Waller deal was sort of prioritized above his, has made things a little bit more complicated. However, that's going to be a big decision to make. 29 years old, and also Rocky Sin, probably the number 2 cornerback behind Nate Hobbs, arguably number 1 at times. This guy's been performing pretty well, to be completely honest. Yes, Mac Hollins, his contract also expires this year. So even if, and when you look at these list of players of starters whose contract expires next year, there's only about 4 or 5 starters. I mean, you got Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Abram, Rocky Sin, Denzel Perryman. Those are 4 starters for sure. And I guess Mac Hollins, when we are in a 3 wide receiver set, you could say he's a starter as well. In my opinion, it's kind of a bright spot because it goes to show you that the Raiders actually have several players who are going to be back, several players who are on this team this year, leading contributors outside of these 5 starters. All these other starters are going to be back next year, and they're going to be gelling in this system for the 2nd year in a row. So the Raiders are still in a position to make the playoffs. But if they lose to any of these opponents that they should beat, people like the Texans, people like the Saints, people like the Jags, if they do that, then you're going to have to look forward to next year. But fortunately, they got a lot of starters returning next year. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what you think the Raiders record is going to end up being this year. My name is WiFiWillie. Like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe to this channel for more Raiders content. Peace out, and I hope you have a good one.